Hey guys, it's Britt, and I'm here to do a critical review of The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. Now, I've done reviews and I talk about this series a lot on my channel because it's my favorite series of, all time, and I love The Raven cycle, but I'm just here to talk about book one, as if I don't know the entire series. And just so you know, The Raven Cycle by Maggie Stiefvater even beats out my love for Game of Thrones. Just, just slightly, by like a point. But anyway, we have to be mean to the things we love sometimes because the things we love have flaws, and I think it's important to acknowledge that those things have flaws. This video was inspired by the video series of Francina Simone's videos. I'll link those up here as I speak, and I'll also link her channel and the videos in the description down below, and you guys should go subscribe and follow her because she's wonderful. Anyway, so the Raven Boys. What at the core summary of the Raven Boys is this girl named Blue Sargent. She comes from a family of psychics. She herself isn't psychic, but like everybody else in her family that lives in her house at 300 Box Way is a psychic, and she amplifies their psychic abilities. And she lives in Henrietta, Virginia, and near her house there is a private school named Agliombi Academy, and it's a private school, and she works at this Nino's. It's a diner, pizza place type thing where everybody goes to hang out, and while she's working there, she meets this group of boys, as she calls them, the Raven Boys, because the Agliombi symbol is a raven. So there is Gansey, who is the leader of the group. There is Ronan, who is the rebel of the group. He gets himself into a lot of trouble. There is Adam, who is probably one of the most believable characters in this book in particular. And then there is Noah, who is very special. So, I don't know if I warned people of spoilers, but there's going to be spoilers. So she meets these boys, and Gansey has died once before, and through his death, he becomes obsessed with this deceased Welsh king, Glendower. And he has a journal. He documents his research about Glendower via this journal, and he leaves it in the diner one day, and Blue picks it up, and the boys just so happen to come in for a reading one day, and Blue says that I think this journal is yours. You left it at Nino's the other day. And she gets roped into this adventure to find Glendower. And Francina talks a lot about character authenticity, and for the most part, I agree with her. And maybe I'm going to do my best to keep my personal bias out of this. So, I agree. I think Adam is one of the most authentic characters, because he's probably the most relatable. Adam is not rich which sets him apart from the rest of his friends. He attends Aglion B because he received a scholarship, basically, and he has a very difficult home life. He's, I hate to say it, but his family is basically trailer trash, and it's very difficult for him to accept money and form friendships with other people besides this small, tiny group. And even then, he struggles because he has to work so hard, and it appears that these boys just don't have to work for anything, they just get it. And that frustrates him. And anyway, to go back to Ronan, we learn from Gansey, was a very different person before the events of the Raven Boys. A year prior, he lost his father, and that affected him greatly. His mother is also sick from an unknown illness, and that also frustrates him. So Ronan causes a lot of trouble. He acts out. He has tattoos all over his back, and I don't know if you can see it, but I also got tattooed when I was very young, and before you ask, no, I don't regret it. I love this. I love my tattoo. I don't regret it at all. And anyway, he gets his entire back tattooed, and he causes trouble. He gets drunk a lot, and Ronan is great. I love Ronan. And I thought that Ronan was probably the most believable out of the teenagers, because teenagers like to go out and drink and get drunk generally, not all teenagers like to do that, but I thought that made Ronan more believable. The setting is in Henrietta, Virginia, and as far as I'm aware, Henrietta, Virginia is a real place, but obviously there's no magical forest like in the Raven Boys, and if there is, I'm gonna go to Henrietta, Virginia real quick and start my own search for Glen Tower. So, Francina makes the argument that it didn't feel very authentic. When I first read it, I read it as first read through, I thought the setting was very believable. I believed that these boys were on an adventure. But upon this critical read through, I have to acknowledge that in retrospect, a lot of the elements to this story weren't very believable. And I want to talk, speaking of things not being believable, we're going to talk about one of the main characters, Noah, for a second here. Now, Noah is one of the boys, and I said he's very special, and by special, I mean that he is a ghost. He is a ghost. These boys have been walking around with Noah for, like, at least 2 years. And they've never noticed that he was a little... They describe him as smudgy. They never saw him eat, And Gamzee comes to this conclusion pretty late in the... kinda late into the story. So, I love Noah, and I love the supernatural element, but I saw it coming from a mile away, and to say that I believe that these 4 boys and Blue didn't spend all that time with Noah being his best friend, never seeing him eat or drink or go to the bathroom, I would hope that you would notice that one of your best friends is dead and is a ghost. Did he come out of nowhere? How did he introduce himself to you guys? Did he just float over one day and said, "Hey, I'm Noah. Nice to meet you"? Am I supposed to believe that? By the way, first read through, I totally didn't care. I love Noah. It seems like I'm talking a lot of smack, but I love Noah, and I love all these boys, don't get me wrong. I love all these characters, despite how authentic or inauthentic they may be. I love this story, and I want to talk a little bit about Maggie's writing. While I love her writing, and I think Maggie's writing is beautiful, it's also not the best writing out there. If you pick up this book, you know that you're going into a young adult book, and that's not to say that young adult authors can't write, but especially with other fantasy novels, adult fantasy novels, there's a very, what I believe to be a very distinct difference. There's a certain level of maturity in adult fantasy novels that I notice, and maybe it's because the characters are younger, but this is something that I notice. I noticed that young adult authors tend to have a very, very different writing style than authors like George R. R. Martin. George sounds very mature when he writes, and I think a lot of that also has to do with that a lot of these young adult authors are very young themselves, so they don't have a lot of the experiences that they are attempting to write about. Yes, they were once teenagers, but I think a lot of young adult authors writing suffers because when you write a teenager, there's a certain amount of immaturity, and I think that shows in the writing. But anyway, guys, that's all I have to say about this. I still love the Raven Boys. I still love the Raven Cycle, and despite the fact that it might not be the most well-written, authentic book, I still love it, and I will read it over and over again. And, oh, I almost forgot to mention this important thing that I wanted to mention. Okay, so when I went into this series for the first time, I read The Raven Boys. I read The Raven Boys on my Kindle, and I went in expecting to make fun of it, and because it was like all over BookTube, and I was like, the Raven Boys, sidekicks and ghosts. How can people think that this is a good story? And I was blown away. But also, Francina makes a point that that the character voices don't really change. And I only noticed this when, one, she pointed it out to me, and two, once I finished the Raven cycle, I got the audiobooks for the rest of them, and they're narrated by Will Patton. And Will Patton does a phenomenal job at giving each and every single character a unique voice. And he does a bunch of different accents, and it's amazing. And you're never confused about which character is talking, because Will does amazing narration. And upon going back and reading The Raven Boys without Will's narration, because I wanted to make note of the lack of a distinct voice, like Francina said, I did notice that, and a lot of the times I found myself unsure of who was talking without Will's narration, and maybe that's not the same for everybody, but that was my experience. So anyway, guys, that's all I really wanted to say. I know this is kind of long, and I'm sorry about that, but I love you guys, and I will see you in the next video. Francina, if you watch this and you want to read, if you want to read The Dream Thieves with me, if you want to read it with me after the baby's born and you've kind of adjusted to new baby and baby parenthood all over again, if you want to read that with me, I would be so happy, because I would love to buddy read a book with you, honestly. So anyway, guys, I love you, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.